Hello everyone, this is Josh Friedel for ChessLecture.com, and today I'll be lecturing on a weapon against the Lopez's black. Now, the Ruy Lopez has sort of been the bane of V5 players' existence for quite a while. It's considered one of the main ways of getting an advantage of pretty much the only way to really get an advantage for white against E5, as the Scotch has not been doing so great lately. So it's been around for a while and is a pretty dangerous line. So it's very important for any E5 player to have a good weapon against it. And I have sort of something which I've been playing for a few years, which I think is a very nice weapon against it, and which a lot of people still don't know. So E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop B5, for Lopez. So now F5 is the Schliemann, which I actually played for a long time, but is unfortunately unsound. So I had to find a new opening. So A6, bishop A4, knight F6, castles. Now, white has a couple other choices, of course, before this. There's the exchange variation, and there's the late exchange, which is taking on C6 now. And however, those I might go over at a later time, as this is a pretty much completely different opening. There's also D3, after which black should play B5, bishop B3. Let me play it. B5, bishop B3, bishop C5. And this transposes into the D3 line of the Archangel, which we'll go over later. And is a line that's pretty tame for white. Certainly doesn't cause black too many headaches, but we still have to know what you're doing. So anyway, going back. So castles is white's main move. And now the Archangel is B5, bishop B3, and bishop C5. So here, there are lots of options for white. However, only really a few good ones. There is Rook E1, is a move a lot of amateurs would play, just on seeing this. This would be sort of what a robot would play, someone who, they play the same moves against everything. They know against bishop E7, this is the main type move, so they'll play Rook E1 immediately. However, in this position, Rook E1 really doesn't come in handy as much as it does, so it's really not a very hard line. Also, F2 often is a problem for white in these positions. Now, knight G4 immediately is a little bit fishy. However, if white just plays D6, castles, plays the bishop out to G4 if white allows it, or B7, either square is fine, black really just doesn't have too many problems after this. And the rook on E1 is just a misplaced piece. So basically, you play that like you would a typical Archangel, which I'll be showing. But after Rook E1, it's just white's not right down the tempo, but it's certainly not the most useful move. So there's knight takes E5, which is mainly what I'll be going over, however, in a different move order. Knight takes E5, D4, and now black's best is to take on D4. Queen takes D4, D6, and now if F4, knight C6, and if C3, C5. And this transposes pretty much into a slightly better version for black of the game I'm going to be going over today. So you'll get a chance to see these lines, only a slightly better version for white. This is really no problems for black. I think I have a score of maybe 7.5 or 8 in this variation. So take my word for it, it's quite good. So, going back. So after bishop C5 now, C3 is also a pretty important move. D3, of course, which I'll go over later, perhaps in another lecture. Because it really, although it's a tame move, I've lost to it pretty badly. So you really have to know what you're doing after it. However, black should usually be fine. D3 is another move, which, in my opinion, is like A4, only less accurate. The line would go, for example, after C3, D6, D4, bishop B6, also A4 is possible. And now if A4, black can play rook B8, which would transpose into the main line, or bishop G4 is another option, which is totally viable for black. And basically, white's allowed this option for no reason whatsoever. So really, this move order is just much less accurate. And after bishop g4, although it's not that simple, it's certainly a pretty nice option as an alternative to rook b8. However, a4 is much more annoying. Now black's forced to play either rook b8 or bishop b7. Bishop b7 is pretty much a totally different system whatsoever, as it's basically a solid version of the Archangel. After bishop b7, white can either play d3, where in the other position d3 is very tame. Here it actually gives white some reasonable chances for advantage. Or white can play c3, d4 again. In either case, I think that although black's relatively solid, white has all the chances there. Black's just trying to hold on. So in my opinion, rook b8 is the better move. So now, white can play c3 or take on b5 immediately. Take on b5 immediately I find is more common, but they usually transpose. And now, the main line would go c3, d6. Castles is also a new move here. The so-called hang the e-pawn by forgetting to play d6 variation is what I call it, because basically I'm almost positive that's how this move was invented. Some guy was playing too fast, forgot to play d6, and I'm like, oh no, I'm going to hang my e-pawn. Because now, if takes d4, c takes d4 is simply good for white. So he said, okay, I'll make the best of it, de, knight g4, and all of a sudden black has some serious compensation. So this has actually been played more recently by Gadakovsky, Anand. They both played this with relative success. So it's actually an interesting alternative. But again, that's something I might go over in a later lecture. So d6, d4, bishop b6 is the main line. And now, white can play h3, for example, something slow. But then black's usually fine after bishop b7. So now knight takes e4 is a threat. So often white would play rook e1. Remember, the move which is not necessarily all that useful. And then castles. And here, black should be doing fine. Also, any move with rook e1 or whatever is also not a huge threat. So, after d4, bishop b6, knight a3 is the main move. Castles, knight takes b5. Now black has a couple main options here. Bishop g4 immediately, and ed4, cd4, bishop g4. Both of these are very complex and really crazy variations where you really have to know what you're doing. Believe it or not, they're actually very different from each other, even though all it does is throw in a pawn capture. And however, these lines I will be looking at in a future lecture. For this lecture, I'm going to be mainly focusing on knight takes e5 in this position, as here it's a much more dangerous move. Because in contrast to the other position, white now has the open A file, and often the rook penetrating to a7 is a real annoyance for black. So you have to really know what you're doing. So after knight takes e5, d4, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, d6. Now white can play c3, after which black plays c5 and then castles. And in those positions, although black certainly doesn't have an advantage, the position is very, very comfortable for black, typically. And again, I've scored very well in those positions, and I really think they hold up nicely. And so knight c3 is very rarely a good option for white, as it allows c5 followed by c4, hemming the bishop in. So really, the best option for white as far as trying to get any kind of advantage is f4. Very aggressive move. So now, black has to move the knight back. You might as well do it by attacking the queen. White has a couple options. However, queen d1 has been played. It is very interesting. Or queen d2.